Peace, greetings to you all. It's your brother Naheem, BKA Lord Abba, AKA Mr. Just the Facts. Tonight we are doing part 2 of our A History and Violence. And this time we are going to focus on the Reconstruction era. Please make sure y'all hit the like button. Make sure y'all share. If you want to contribute to the platform, you can contribute by using the Cash App handle, BETHEPOWER, or use the Patreon to become a monthly recurring donor so that we can grow this platform. Tonight we have another powerful demonstration. So, like I said, make sure you all share. I'm gonna start this thing off by going into this image right here. This is a sigil, if you will. And it has to be discussed in that manner. The manner of a sigil. A secret, I don't want to say secret, but a sketch, a drawing, a painting that has a secret encoded message in it. Although this is not a secret encoded message, it still serves as a sigil to show how the European, the white man in this country, as they're called, brutalized and terrorized our people, and how that still goes on to this day. So I want to break this image down before we get in real briefly, right? This is members of the White League and the KKK, white Christian terrorist organizations who sanctioned themselves as judge, jury, and executioner to pretty much destroy our quote-unquote race of people. At the top, it reads, "The Union as it was." This is a white government. Underneath that, there's a skull between the handshake of those in the White League and the Ku Klux Klan that reads "The Lost Cause." And underneath that, worse than slavery. And that's exactly what this period was. This period, because of the brutalities that were done to our people, was in fact worse than slavery. Some may argue and debate that, but we have a body count of thousands upon thousands that says otherwise. In the background of this image, you see the stated goal. You see a man, one of our ancestors, depicted hanging from a tree. And the family, man, woman, and child, also called the black man, woman, and child, cowering under fear of this union of death and hell that was waged upon our ancestors here in the United States of America, and in large part is still going on till this day. So I want to, let me bring my brothers in, and I'm going to start off. I'm going to start this demonstration off tonight with a presentation out of a book called White by Law. Peace to everybody that's in the chat. Peace, brother Corey Lorenz. I see you. Peace, Bond Dog. D, Swizz 13. Peace, family. We're going to start this off with this book, White Too Long. And like I said, the sheer horrors that our people went through were atrocious. And I'm going to detail one of these accounts by white Christian terrorists. So, peace to the freedmen. Peace to everybody tuning in. Don't forget to share. Don't forget to hit the like button. All right, I'm coming from a book called The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. White Too Long by Robert P. Jones. This is a powerful book. So the first account that I am going to get into is the accounts of a man by the name of Thomas Wilkes. He also went by the name of Sam Holes or Sam Holt. And what they did to this brother was just absolutely brutal. And it's one in many of the brutalities that we had to face here as a people. So let's get into, let me give some backdrop first. This brother is an educated man. The year was 1899, educated brother, rare for that time. He decided to forego higher education so he could take care of his mother, who was an invalid, and he also had younger siblings who needed tending to. So he just, instead of pursuing his career of higher education, he did some domestic work. So he took a job and he got gypped out of his money by this man named Cranford, this European white man named Cranford. And they got into a dispute, and Cranford tried to kill the brother. And the brother did like some acrobatics, took an axe and threw it at Cranford, hitting him straight in the dome piece. Talk a little street on this one. Hit him straight in the dome. So the reports that came out were brutal. I mean, brutal. They lied. They said that this man raped Cranford's wife in a puddle of his own blood after he dashed the baby to the ground. Oh, they made up story after story. As this book notes, each newspaper article hoping to outdo the other. So let's read. It says, the word that Wilkes had been captured and was to be lynched in the nearby town of Noonan reached Atlanta on a Sunday morning. The scene was surreal. When the city's white churches emptied from morning services, many worshipers streamed straight from church to the train station, hoping to participate in the much anticipated lynching. To meet demand, the Atlanta and West Point Railroad put together a special run with 6 coaches and conductors that roamed the platform shouting, special train to Noonan, all aboard for the burning. This is how they advertised. Right after church folk that was in there possibly going through all of the things that church folk do inside the church, but couldn't wait to get out of the church. They couldn't wait to get out of the church so that they could go at this guy Wilkes. It says, before the awful carnivalesque violence erupted, there was one moment of truth. Although there is no record of any Christian clergy addressing the crowd as they reached the town square and courthouse, they were confronted by 2 community leaders, former Governor William Yates Atkinson and Judge Alvin D. Freeman. Now, these guys were trying to basically get them to, chill. Like, let me try to appeal to your Christian. Like, how do you leave church? How do you leave church and then go to this? It says, at the sight, he was stripped naked and a chain was wrapped around his body. I mean, these people are some of the most depraved humans that ever walked, and their ancestors, they live right amongst us today. Many of them stormed the Capitol on January 6th. It says, at the sight, he was stripped naked, Wilkes was, and a chain was wrapped around his body from neck to foot, locked around his chest, and attached to a tree. Tree limbs and railroad ties were laid at his feet, and young boys, the young European, the young white boys, scavenged for additional brush to add to the pyre. Before the fire was lit, Wilkes was tortured for a half hour. His ears were cut off, his fingers removed one by one, and his genitals severed, with each held up for the approval of the cheering crowd. So every time they would cut off an ear or cut off this man's genitals or finger, etc., One of these devils would hold it up to the crowd, and the crowd would cheer. Yeah, it's the nature of the people that we're dealing with. This mentality that they had then is not too far off from the mentality that they have today. With Wilkes in agony, but alive, he was doused with kerosene and the pyre was lit. At that point, he screamed his last words, "Sweet Jesus." Gotta think about that for 1 second. His last words was "Sweet Jesus." The people that just came from praising Jesus in their church institution went and burned and tortured a man alive. And his last words was the words of, or the object of worship in their religion. He said, "Sweet Jesus." These were the only words that he could get out of his mouth. Wilkes struggled against the flames, it continues, breaking the chain and lunging forward, at which point several whites pushed them back into the flames with large pieces of lumber and pinned him down until he died. While the intensity of the violence and suffering caused some in the crowd to look away, it also inspired expressions of religious ecstasy, reminiscent of revival meetings. Glory. And no man in the crowd was recorded as saying, "Glory be to God." But even Wilkes' gruesome death didn't fully satisfy the frenzied crowd. The Atlanta Constitution described the aftermath in vivid detail. I didn't add that detailed part. I don't think. Let me see. No, I didn't add that detailed part. Well, yes, I did. Excuse me. Let's get into that. This is just crazy. This is crazy. It says a few smoldering ashes scattered about the place. A blackened stake are all that is left to tell the story. Not even the bones of the Negro were left in place, but were eagerly snatched by a crowd of people drawn here from all directions, who almost fought over the burning body of the man, carving it with knives and seeking souvenirs of the occurrence. This event became pivotal in W.E.B. Du Bois's understanding of how embedded white supremacy was in the psyches of many white Christians who saw no conflict with attending a lynching on the way home from church, and of the most respected white civic and religious leaders who either looked the other way or actively aided the murder. As Du Bois was on his way to confront the editor of the Atlanta Constitution about its role in promoting Wilkes' lynching, he was stunned to see the victim's fingers and toes proudly on display in the windows of the local meat market between his house and the newspaper office. These are some gruesome savages that we had to deal with, family, and we're still in large part dealing with them until this day. It reads, the gruesome, menacing sight literally stopped him in his tracks. Du Bois reversed his steps and returned to his office at Atlanta University, realizing that facts and knowledge could not reach whites capable of such brutality in the bright light of a Sunday afternoon. He often recalled this. He often recalled this event as one that, quote unquote, pulled me off my feet and caused him to switch his career from scholar to activist. As he put it, quote, I realized one could not be a calm, cool, and detached scientist while Negroes were lynched, murdered, and starved. So you see, this is the depravity that we had to deal with. This is the burning body. There's an image of it. The burnt body of Wilkes. This is the image of the man that they call Tom Holt or Sam Holt or Sam Holes. This is his burnt up body. His remains are held at the Coweta County African American Heritage Museum in Noonan, Georgia. And we see an image, a depiction of this man who was educated, a smart man. It reads the depiction of Sam Holes, also known as Sam Holt, as in the first page above, appeared on the front page of the Atlanta Journal on April 24th, 1899. Remember, this is the same Atlanta Journal that W.E.B. Du Bois was going to confront about the way they promoted this event. These are wicked, wicked devils. So I'm going to stop. I'll share one more image. Let me see. Let's share one more image because the newspaper showed an image of the couple. The guy Cranford was killed, and rightfully so, by the brother. He literally stood his ground. This is the wife that let all of this stuff happen, but then she finally came out and said, well, no, he didn't rape me, and he didn't slam my baby to the ground. He didn't slam my baby to the ground. So let me stop sharing that, but bring my brother Logic on, and we're going to continue going in on this history. That's right, Ela J. Dotson. This is what they want. This is how they wish to make America great again, by pulling off some of the most heinous atrocities in human history. This is what they would like, but we're not having it at all.
Man, that was really something, man. And I know we've talked about that story and that lynching, man, but you have to see, if you don't get into your history, it's easy for you to like kind of fall into the whole narrative that it was so long ago, and we can get over it and we can be friends and we can all just get along now. That was somebody's father. That was somebody's uncle. That was somebody's cousin. That was one of our family members. Did y'all listen to what he just said happened to that brother, to that man? Family. I'm going to get into some history about lynching and things of that nature, and then get into some of the reasons why this is such a important. See, a lot of people want to forget about the trauma and forget about all of the violence, but we're here tonight to remind you of the violence. You understand? Because that violence was never atoned for. There was never no justice for that violence. That violence is the reason why a lot of us are in the conditions that we are in today. If I burnt your father up, where would you be today? If I took your mother and beat her to death, where would you be today? So you can't, you have to understand that is disrespectful for somebody to say that, that's not you. That didn't happen to you. If it happened to my grandmother, it happened to me. If you destroyed the soul and the spirit of my grandparents, murdered them, killed them, what did that do to me? You can't say that didn't affect me. Let's go into some of this. We're gonna build after this, but let me get into some of this, right? Y'all can this is a work that was done. You can look it up on the internet. It's called Lynching in America. Got really good data, really good information. I'm just going to read a little bit from you. I got a couple pieces I want to touch on if I can get to it tonight. So it says Southern lynching took on an even more racialized character after the Civil War. The act and threat of lynching became primarily a technique to enforce racial exploitation, economic, political, and cultural. Now, lynching has always been happening, but they're talking about the uptick. We spoke about it a couple shows ago. I read a piece from Ida B. Wells, and we talked about the scourging of the slave. But they didn't kill the slave because that was getting into their capitalistic profits. But once emancipation and we became freedmen, the violence took on a new face. Hell got a little bit hotter, right? Characterized by Southern mob violence, intended to reestablish white supremacy and suppress Black civil rights through political and social terror, the Reconstruction era was a violent period in which tens of thousands of people were killed in racially and politically motivated massacres, murders, and lynchings. White mobs regularly targeted African Americans with deadly violence, but rarely aimed lethal attacks at white individuals accused of identical violations of law or custom, right? By the end of the 19th century, a lot of people try to say, oh, hanging, they hung Jesse James, and hanging was just a penalty for violating the law. But let's talk about it. By the end of the 19th century, Southern lynching had become a tool of racial control that terrorized and targeted African Americans. The ratio of Black lynching victims to white lynching victims was 4-1 from 1882 to 1889, increased to more than 6-1 between 1890 and 1900, and soared to more than 17-1 after 1900. Professor Stuart Talney concluded from this data that lynching in the South became increasingly and exclusively a matter of white mobs murdering African Americans, a routine and systemic effort to subjugate the African American minority. The character of the violence also changed as gruesome public spectacle lynchings became much more common. Naheem just talked about one, right? Common. And I don't know if you got to read the whole piece, but if y'all get that book White Too Long, people were coming, they were catching the train and coming from across the next town, and they was coming from all over the place to be a part of this spectacle. They glorified, you heard them talk about the brother yelling glory. They worship the destruction of our ancestors, and then they have the nerve to come up here and today and tell you forget about it. But I'm talking about lynching in the 1900s. That ain't that long ago. We only in 2021, right? Such brutally violent methods of execution had almost never been applied to whites in America. Indeed, public spectacle lynchings drew from and perpetuated the belief that Africans were subhuman, a myth that had been used to justify centuries of enslavement and now fueled the purportedly justified terrorism aimed to newly emancipated American communities. Report published in 1905 explained that lynching has been resorted to by whites, not merely to wreak vengeance, but to terrorize and restrain this lawless element in the Negro population. Among Southern people, the conviction is generally that terror is the only way to restrain influence. Terror is the only restraining influence that can be brought to bear upon vicious Negroes, right? This is the story that they're telling about our ancestors. This is American history. And we go up here, let's look at a scene. They're talking about, there's a lot of good stuff in here. Y'all got to get this, get on this website, check it out. It's called Lynching in America. Let's look at, this is our ancestors, people. These are the freedmen. Look at how they're forcing our ancestors to live. All right. Now let's slide on up here. And let's look at some of the lynching. See, this is the whole thing right here. It's the third edition, Lynching in America, Confronting the Legacy of Racial Terror. Because that's what it was. When we say this was domestic terror, it's not that like we're just making it up. This is what the reporters reported it as. Look at, that's our ancestor hanging, right? That's one of our ancestors hanging right there. And look at this mob. Do these look like good, God-fearing people? Look at them.
They look like the same people that stormed the Capitol.
Don't they?
That's right. That's right.
Many of these people, and let me tell you something, right? This was just in 1920. It said men and boys posed beneath the body of Lee Daniels, a black man, shortly after he was lynched on August 3rd, 1920, in Center, Texas, James Allen, yada, 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 yada. Look at this. A lot of these people's, look at some of these young people here, man. Look at these people. A lot of these individuals right here, grandchildren were at that Capitol. You understand? Their grandbabies was there. And they've been continuing this custom of hate and violence. You understand? It ain't went nowhere. And anytime we start progressing, they come right on out with it. And they let you know what they all about real quick. They don't have no problem letting you know what they about. So I wanted to show another picture, but I want to read another example, right? Because lynching lasted for what, 85 years in America? 85 years of lynching? Lynching was a legal thing. This is why reparations is a must, because it is state and government sanctioned terrorism. I don't think people get it. We were on a reparations debate last weekend with a professor from Georgia, and he was basically trying to minimize and downplay the significance of the horror and the terror that come from our history here in America. And we told you, I just read that by the 1900s, lynching in America, freedmen were lynched 17-1. For every one white man or woman, 17 of our ancestors was lynched. And Naheem gave a breakdown of what these lynchings looked like. Burning of the bodies, cutting off of the body parts and auctioning them off. Some of they grind the bones to dust and make powder of it, put it in jars and bags and sell it in the store. What they say, they had the brother's fingers cut off and dangling in the store.
That's right. His toes and I think his fingers or something else in the window.
In the window
as a display.
Now tell me what kind of people in America has had that same kind of history. And then people want to come in and say, we need to lock arms with everybody. Well, who was locking arms when they was cutting my ancestors' fingers and toes off and hanging them in the grocery store and in the corner store? This is why this has to be a specific justice claim. You understand? Because what was happening to us, this violence was specific. And then you have people who want to say, well, y'all trying to make this a racial thing. We're not trying to make it a racial thing. We never wanted it to be about race. The government made it about race. They made it about race when they singled us out and treated us the way they did. They didn't treat every other American like that. It wasn't because we were poor. They didn't treat every poor American like that. They treated us like that because of who we were, what we done for the country, and that we posed to American greatness, right? The stolen legacy of the freedmen. You understand? So there's so much when we get into this violence. It's just so much that goes. I had some stuff that I wanted to read, but I'll tell you, I'll refer this book to you right here. I read from it a lot. It's The Red Record by Ida B. Wells. It's nothing but a book of lynching accounts, different accounts of lynching. And if you read some of this stuff, it'll just make you cry. It's nothing but accounts of, even when we was innocent. I'll read a little piece. All right, a small piece from Ida B. Wells' book, The Red Record. It said, she gives instances and she titles each little excerpt of each different lynching. The title of this one is called "Lynched Because the Jury Acquitted Him." Now, this is a man. This is a woman in this instance being lynched because they were innocent. Now, what kind of government is that you live in? We getting lynched because we are actually innocent and getting proved innocent in the court of law. Now, let me read the story. Now, it says, the entire system of the judiciary of this country is in the hands of white people. We got to understand, Society B. Wells is writing in her day and in her time, right? To this, add the fact of the inherent prejudice against colored people, and it will be clearly seen that a white jury is certain to find a Negro prisoner guilty if there is the least evidence to warrant such a finding. Meredith Lewis was arrested in Roseland, Louisiana in July of last year. A white jury found him not guilty of the crime of murder wherewith he stood charged. This did not suit the mob. A few nights after the verdict was rendered and he declared to be innocent, a mob gathered in his vicinity and went to his house. He was called and suspected nothing, went outside. He was seized and hurried off to the convenience spot and hanged by the neck until he was dead for the murder of a woman of which the jury had said he was innocent. So this is America for us. Now, when you can show me in the overwhelming abundance of another group's narrative equaling and paralleling that, and this is just countless and countless attacks of how even when we're proven innocent, the government doesn't step in. There was no equal protection under the law for freedmen. That there was a constitutional right. Like the the professor from the debate last week and tried to really blame it on the states. It was like all that stuff was happening in the states. Well, where the hell was the federal government? They had just passed not too long ago the 14th Amendment declaring equal protection under the law. You understand? So they knew what was going on because Andrew Johnson put these people into office, Governor Perry and these provisional governors in Mississippi and in South Carolina. You understand? So he knew what was going on. They didn't care. It was murder by neglect, and it was terrorism by government sanction. So our case has been building and building and building and building. So no one has a case like us. This is specific history. And when you can show me books and the whole entire libraries filled with other groups in America having a history like that, then we can talk about a different kind of specificity. But until then, reparations for the freedmen. And then I'll turn it over.
Indeed. Brother Josh had to step away real quick, so we're going to bring on Brother Grimm, and then we'll bring on Brother Josh after that, and then Ali Bey is going to give his breakdown. Oh, Ali is not even known yet. And then we'll just have some dialogue after that.
Peace, Brother Grimm. And what I'm going to talk about today is two of the most violent politically motivated massacres during the Reconstruction, because the title of part 2 is basically dealing with violence during the Reconstruction period. And we have to realize that these people in the South were basically trying to continue and solidify their power, even though they had lost the Civil War. So the first thing I want to talk about, because this two things I want to talk about. The massacre of 1866 and also the Colfax massacre, also known as the Colfax riot. And I don't want to step on Josh's toes because Josh is going to talk about something that's equally important. And basically what you have is under the Reconstruction Act of 1867, you know, basically the suffrage and the reins of the government was supposed to be given over to the citizens and the freedmen, and they were supposed to be restricted from the people who participated in the insurrection against the government, also known as Confederates, right? So let me get right into it. I want to talk about the Colfax massacre real quick. The Colfax massacre was on an Easter Sunday. See, these people killed on the resurrection of Jesus Christ, right?
Hey, it was Grimm. That brothers, I think his was that Easter Sunday too. I don't know. My bad. I didn't mean it. I thought his was Easter Sunday too. It wasn't. It wasn't. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. But Easter Sunday, right? These demons on April 13th, 1873 in Colfax, Louisiana, because you all need to research and study the Colfax massacre, because this basically set the death knell for the power of the freedmen after the Reconstruction. And see, like Herschel Walker, dumbass, basically was talking about, oh, that was in the past. What year was those pictures in the HR 40 hearing? But see, what they are missing, like what Logic was saying, they're missing the point. What they're missing is that these events are not isolated in history, but created decades and decades of Black apathy, right, to vote in the South, because people were scared. People were saying, oh, nothing ain't changed. They would kill us like they was killing us on the plantation. And that junk went on and on and on and on. So it's hard to get our people to vote. Some people say it's laziness, right? But even if it's laziness, it has its root in the violence committed against freedmen during the Reconstruction. So in Colfax, Louisiana in 1873, an estimated, they say 62 to 153 Black men were murdered by white Southerners who had formed a militia. Only the 3 of those white men were shot, and one of them was shot by one of their homeboys, right? So this all was happening during Reconstruction. So in 1772, there was an election of a governor in Louisiana. And in the local offices in Colfax, Louisiana, it was a group of white Democrats. They was armed with rifles, a small cannon, and they overpowered the Republican freedmen and the state militia. And the state militia also happened to be black. So these devils, they killed commissioned state militia freedmen and also Republican freedmen citizens, right? And then they occupied the Grant Parish courthouse in Colfax. So with that, you know, most of the freedmen was overpowered, so they surrendered. So they surrendered, and then they killed 50 more after they were most of them was killed, and then they killed 50 more later on that night that they took prisoner. And the estimates of the numbers of the people who had died ranged from 62 to 153, but probably was more because it was difficult to obtain, because some of the bodies of the freedmen was thrown in the Red River or basically removed for burial, right? So let's give a quick overview on this thing real quick, right? The Red River area in Rapides Parish was a combination of the large plantations and subsistence farmers before the war. African Americans had worked as slaves on those plantations. So there was a man by the name of William Calhoun who was a planter and a slave owner, but he was married to a woman, or rather a common law wife, I should say, of a woman who was of mixed race. And he had basically come to support the black political power in the parish. So on that day, Calhoun had led a group of freedmen to the ballot box. And the ballot box was originally at a store owned by a person named John Hope, who basically had threatened to whip the freedmen if they voted Republican. So then Calhoun basically arranged for the ballot box to be switched to a plantation store owned by a Republican. So in addition, he oversaw the submission of 150 black votes from the freedmen and on his plantation land. The Republicans received 318 votes, and the Democrats had received 49. So a group of whites basically took the damn ballot box and then threw the ballot box in the rivers. And then the Democrats, without authority, arrested Mr. Calhoun, and they started alleged election fraud. Sounds familiar? Sounds familiar? Because this devil at number 45, who was the president, he is nothing more than the echo of the sentiments of Andrew Johnson. So when they lose, they always accuse the other side of cheating. That's why I say, sound familiar? So they arrested Calhoun, and the original ballot box gone. The Democrat who was running by the name of Michael Ryan went on to claim a landslide victory. See, they took the government by force from the freedmen. Now, here's the next thing that I want to talk about, because I only got a couple of minutes left on my presentation, right? So the next thing, and I also want to show a video later, Brother Naheem. It's only about 5 minutes when it's all over with, maybe towards the end, and after everybody has gone. So, you know, I'm going to pass that up. But what I also want to talk about is the massacre, the New Orleans massacre, because basically the New Orleans massacre in 1866 basically set the groundwork for the Colfax massacre, which put the death knell for Reconstruction in Louisiana and in the South, if you really look at it. So this occurred on July 30th, 1866. So there was a bunch of riots of white people, basically, you know, racial conflicts during the Reconstruction because they didn't want to turn over power. So the incident had a special significance. It basically galvanized, right, the national opposition to the moderate Reconstruction policies of that demon Andrew Johnson, and that basically ushered in a sweeping congressional Reconstruction in 1867. That, and basically from that was passed the Reconstruction Act of 1867. So this event basically took place outside the Mechanics Institute in New Orleans as black and white delegates attended the Louisiana Constitutional Convention. So the convention had reconvened because the Louisiana state legislature had recently passed the black codes. See, even in Reconstruction, these people were trying to pass laws based upon race, and they refused to extend voting rights to the freedmen. So on May 12, 1866, 4 years of Union Army imposed martial law had ended, and Mayor Monroe, or John T. Monroe, who basically excuse me, y'all, but basically the Union Army had imposed martial law, and the people who had headed the city government before the Civil War was reinstated as the acting mayor. And Monroe had been active supporter of the Confederacy. And see, that's where all of these secret orders of white men come in. The Ku Klux Klan, the White Camellia League, who Johnson gave passes to do their evil. So basically 130 black New Orleanian residents had marched behind the U.S. flag towards the Mechanics Institute, and a mob led by ex-Confederate white supremacists and members of the New Orleans police force to the Institute to block their way. The mayor claimed their intent was to put down any unrest that came from the convention, but the real reason was to prevent the delegates from the meeting. Y'all see this? Violence by taking over the government by violence, excuse me. So with that being said, that the massacre ensued when they started killing freedmen in New Orleans. And by the end of the massacre, 200 black Union war veterans were killed, including 40 delegates at the convention. Altogether, 238 people were killed and 46 people were wounded. So this all plays a part in the condition. They always keep talking about pull yourself up by your bootstraps. All of this stuff had repercussions all the way into the 60s and the 70s. And that's why you see today that after 140 something years after the Civil War, 150 something years after the Civil War, with all of this quote unquote progression that they say we made, we seeing our first quote unquote African American Secretary of Defense, the first African American that. Y'all see, it's a game, y'all. It's a game played by a scientific code of white supremacists to basically stop us from getting reparations and claiming political power.
That's right. That's right. Brother John, that was a powerful, powerful breakdown. Please, everybody, look up the Colfax massacre, man. Oh, I mean, what can you say? These people are just devils. There's no other way to put it. And that demon seed still exists and persists until this day. Brother Drake Bryant, we're going to answer your question. What are we doing to help anything? We got you, brother. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, peace, family. And shout out to everybody that was tuning in on the HR 40 hearing today and our breakdown and conversation after. We're gonna go in on some more on another program in the future about that. But I want to say to the brother Drake Bryant, not spending too much time on your question, but it's important that we talk about the history. As much as people may have been, as much as people may have been aware about the damage that was done to our people, and we know a lot of the stories, there's a lot of people that still don't know the extent of the stories. And it's something that I think we can get desensitized to, because, you know, a lot of this stuff is talked about lightly. Sometimes it's glossed over, or even we've seen such brutality that we on a daily basis on the news media today, not even this old stuff. But when we talk about this history, you know, it's a different thing that it does for you spiritually, because you're talking about people who are deceased, and we're talking about ancestors and people who lived their whole lives dealing with this and going through this, or were brutally killed. And I'm telling you, it's some different spiritual things at work when you start to speak on this stuff and bring that spirit back up. And and I don't know about you, but it just makes me feel a certain way when I start to think about what was done in the past and the brutality that our people face, because I think about how it translates to my family and how their upbringing influenced their children and their children, which led to me. And you know, and it helps me to think about how I can do better for my children. But it also puts things in perspective to, you know, how I got to where I'm at today. So without getting any deeper into that, I want to talk to you about today. You know, our brother Logic, he dug into lynching, you know, something serious. And it was something serious. Man, I had a link here. Where did that go? Man. I had a link I was going to share up here. Can y'all just, I don't know where it went. Can y'all just give me 1 second here? And can you hold it down for just, let me find this link. Hold on 1 second.
Definitely.
Yo, Grim made me think of something when he was doing his piece, man. Really made me think of something that I read in From Here to Equality. And while Josh is pulling that up, I want to read this real quick. And if you don't have From Here to Equality, it's some of the best history on what we're talking about right now. I have not read anything that captures everything in this type of detail. And I got a lot of great books. I got a lot of great books on this history, but this is really something, really something. Like the political, like people say, just get involved and do certain things, right? Just this is how it was structural, like from the very government, right? On October, it says in From Here to Equality, page 254, right? It says October 1870, white raiders attacked a Republican campaign assembly in Utah, Alabama, killing 4 blacks and wounding 54. The same month, when a Republican majority was declared victorious in South Carolina's Piedmont Cotton Belt, white mobs scored the Lawrenceville courtside in a Negro chase and drove 150 freedmen from their homes. This is theft of wealth. You understand? Being a homeowner and understand what that means. Driving out 150 people from their homes. This is destruction on like the highest level. You don't have this type of history nowhere. And committed 13 murders in the process, including a newly elected white probate judge, a black legislator, and others known and prominent as connected with politics. In February 1871, Jack Dupree, a Mississippi Republican club president who lived in Monroe County, was beaten severely, then taken to a woods several miles away, beaten again, and disemboweled. Klansmen and White Rose Society murdered black Republicans in Mississippi, Alcorn, Noaxbee counties, and in Monroe County, Arkansas. Then in March 1871, in Madridian, Mississippi, gunshots erupted. The courthouse proceedings for 3 black activists who were said to have given incendiary speeches, setting off a riot that ended with the removal of the Republican mayor and then deaths of an estimated 30 blacks, including all the leading colored men of the town, all of the leading colored men in the town, with 1 or 2 exceptions, being murdered in cold blood. Let me know when you're ready, Josh. Read this last piece. Black men in Mississippi, many of them affiliated with the Republican Party, had been exercising their right to vote since 1867. The election campaign of 1874 provided Democrats with the first opportunity to put a permanent end to black suffrage. During the August of 1874 Vicksburg municipal elections, white armed gangs calling themselves the People's or White Man's Party took to the streets and terrorized enough black voters to unseat the city's elected Republican officials. Following that coup d'etat, plantation owners in nearby rural areas formed white league clubs with the goal to weeding out all bad and leading Negroes and controlling more strictly the tenants and other hands. Man, there's so much. It just goes on and on and on. You don't have nobody with no history like that. Nobody has this type of history. If you've never heard of the massacre of Vicksburg, in December of that year, after tsunami of Democratic victory, in December of that year, a tsunami of Democratic victories in the northern white supremacists openly declared war on blacks and that party of Lincoln. Vicksburg was again the site of atrocities perpetrated by militant whites. After demanding that Black Sheriff Peter Crosby, a black sheriff, right, and his board of supervisors vacate their office, former rebels launched what became known as the Vicksburg Massacre, murdering perhaps 300 blacks. In Yazoo County, insurrectionists forced Sheriff Albert T. Morgan to leave the area. Morgan, who was married to a black woman, had played a crucial role helping about 300 black families purchase real estate, and he had overseen the growth of the county school system, all without corruption of the white. All without corruption of the white military company, murdered state. All without corruption and only a slight increase in taxes. Members of the white military company murdered State Senator Charles Caldwell in Clinton, Mississippi, and approximately 30 blacks, including his brother Sam. Yo, this is just the craziest. This is our history, though, family. And nobody taught you. They don't teach you this stuff in school. So if we don't talk about it and teach ourselves, our ancestors just going to be forgotten. Nobody, the Irish always talk about the famine in Ireland and the Irish Republic wars and all the stuff that they've been through. The Sephards and the Ashkenazis always talk about the Holocaust. You understand? Everybody gets to talk about their story. But when we get to talking about it, they say, be quiet. We don't want to hear none of that. Y'all bringing up old stuff. We are here giving you this freedman education. And when you come on Be the Power, you are enrolled in Freedman University.
That's ahead. Right. That's right. Ooh. Hey, and you know what? Other groups are talking about what they went through, and they got some form of justice. We ain't got nothing. We still at the bottom. You know, you can look at other groups and they seem to be doing well. They got banks, they got all kind of, things that help them become like productive and prosperous citizens in their respective nations or in America. Whereas we at the bottom of the bottom, we're just the floor, and people still telling us to shut up and get over it. And, all lives matter and a rising tide will lift all boats and all this bull crap that really is disrespectful, but the disrespect of us has become normalized. So what I want to get into, I just want to continue because we're talking about lynching. Lynching was such a horrible and just terror, just a terrible practice that was instituted and against our people. I want to read this story. I remember hearing about this story and I didn't believe it to be true. Several years ago, I went to the Blacks on Wax Museum in Baltimore, and or for those in Maryland, Baltimore, right? And so I went to the Blacks on Wax Museum and I saw this. They had a lynching exhibit there and I couldn't believe this story. So I was like, man, they wail, but let me read this story. All right. Says, please note this article contains graphic depictions of lynchings. Discretion is advised. In 1918, Brooke County, Georgia, a local plantation owner was killed by Sidney Johnson, a black man who had been leased out to the plantation via the convict lease system in a dispute over unpaid wages. Upon hearing this, the white community went on a rampage and lynched not only Johnson, but anyone they thought to be remotely involved in Johnson's decision. One of these men was Hayes Turner. Not only was he lynched, but also castrated. Turner's wife, Mary, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, began to speak out against her husband's lynching. Unfortunately, she too had become a victim. A white mob hanged her by her feet, set her on fire, sliced her stomach open, and pulled out her baby, which was still alive.
Brutal, man. Wicked.
Jeez. Jeez.
They stomped on her child's head, killing it.
Goddamn demons.
Then the mob took the time to sew 2 cats in Mrs. Turner's stomach and making bets as to which one would climb out first. This can be described as nothing short of demonic. In many ways, even that fails to fully encompass the horror and pure wickedness of this event. Though the only thing more horrid is that, in a way, lynchings continue in the form of police murder. So I'm not gonna continue too much more on this. I just want to say, y'all, and I got emotional when I first saw this display at that Blacks on Wax Museum in Baltimore. If anybody, I don't know if that exhibit is still there, but if anybody, is in the Baltimore area, I definitely recommend you to go there and check that out. Yeah, man, it's terrible. It's terrible, but I never heard a lynching story quite like that, and I don't have any images from that, but thank God. I mean, the images in my head are bad enough. So I want to take it to Wilmington, North Carolina. So we go from Brooke County, Georgia, to Wilmington, North Carolina, and this is actually from from the book by the good Dr. Sandy Darity and A. Kirsten Mullen, From Here to Equality: Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. So, we're breaking this down. Some of these, some accounts of the story were, glossed over or, touched on during today's hearing, HR 40 hearing. But, for us to really make the case, we gotta keep it all the way real. We gotta tie it to today, to show that if left untouched and if justice is not served, if precedent is not made to make up for the fall of the past, the damage of the past, then we just leave it open for it to be continued. So I'm gonna read from the story from Here to Equality. It says, the reparations battleground shifted to Wilmington, North Carolina, and the white insurrection that took place in 1898. The effectiveness of the black male vote in North Carolina, combined with the freedmen's support of the fusion movement, was an affront to white supremacy. Fusion had brought predominantly white farmers in the populist movement into a coalition with the Republican Party, increasingly influenced by black voters. Fusion candidates triumphed in the state's 1894 elections, and in 1896, North Carolina elected its first Republican governor since Reconstruction, Daniel L. Russell, breaking the Democratic Party's 2-decade hold on the position. Meticulously planned and systematically encouraged by white supremacist agitation, the goal of the Wilmington massacre was the overthrow of the city's elected Republican municipal administration. More than 2,000 white Democratic Party supporters, determined to reclaim North Carolina as the white man state, and white men will rule it, forcibly removed lawfully elected black and white officials from government buildings, attacked blacks across the city, and vandalized and burned down burned dozens of black homes and businesses, including the newspaper owned by brothers Alexander and Frank Manley, the Daily Record. Black casualty estimates ranged from 60 to 300. Many blacks left the city permanently. The plotters were drawn from the best class of the city's white people, including, most visibly, Alfred M. Waddell, a former Confederate Army colonel who installed himself as mayor after the massacre. Waddell, a four-time Democratic incumbent congressman, had lost his seat to Daniel Russell in 1878. Russell, a rare member of the planter class who had been such a staunch unionist, had made even more uncharacteristic decision to align himself with the Republican Party after the Civil War. Look, I want to just give a little bit more context here. You see what this said right here? It says many blacks left the city permanently. Now, prior to this, Wilmington, North Carolina was one of the top populated and top bustling black majority cities in the whole United States. But when you have a situation where you got like a coup is thrown, how are you going to stay in that city? You're fleeing white domestic terrorism and murder, mass murder, massacre, violence, destruction of business. Like, what do you're really a refugee. You go from being, doing well or whatever the case may be, business owners, to now refugees. But where do you go? Like, where are you gonna go? It's not like you go into another country. You're still in the other America as it is. But I just wanted to say, like, and it says the plotters were drawn from the best class of the city's white people, including Alfred Waddell, a former Confederate Army colonel. See, how is it that this person it said he was a four-time Democratic incumbent congressman. How is it that this guy can even hold any type of office? I mean, I would have to go into the history. I'm not sure. I would like to see how he was even able, because we know under the 14th Amendment, a lot of these people, Section 2, a lot of these people are not even supposed to hold office. Now, I know
they took those offices by violence.
Yeah. So I'm saying it's unconstitutional how these people even holding office. It's unconstitutional. Don't tell me about how you think your interpretation. I'm talking to the congressman from California earlier today, who was talking about how reparations or even HR 40 would be unconstitutional. How is it constitutional that this man gets to be a colonel in the Confederate Army and still be a Democratic congressman? Right. How does he get to hold a seat? And then how can he install himself as a mayor? So he participated in the insurrection in the war against the United States the first time. Then you let him get back in the office. He think, well, shoot, I can just continue to yield my power. I'm just gonna go and take my seat. I'm gonna do an insurrection against the government again. See, that's the point people missing. If you don't do this thing right for once and for all, it's gonna continue. Let me keep going. Charles Brantley Aycock became a revered education reformer when he was elected North Carolina's 50th governor in 1900, but his white supremacist credentials were unassailable. His inflammatory anti-black rhetoric on the stump in the run-up to the 1898 election played an important role in fomenting the white assault in Wilmington. After learning that the coup was in motion, Aycock, then living in Goldsboro, made his way to the train station, prepared to fight alongside the white rioters. He canceled his plans and remained in Goldsboro when a telegram reached him and the other 500 armed white men who were ready to board the train to Wilmington, informing them that the whites were satisfactorily in control. Good government in the state and peace anywhere. That's good government in the state and peace anywhere. were within Democrats' grasp. Aycock said in 1900 when he accepted his party's unanimous nomination for governor, but first we must disenfranchise the Negro. Julian Carr, an influential tobacco, textile, and banking industrialist born into a slave-owning family, donated 62 acres of land that enabled Trinity College to move to Durham, North Carolina in 1892. Carr's contribution ensured the college's survival and prosperity. It will become Duke University. At the same time, Carr was involved deeply with North Carolina's anti-fusion Democratic Party. He supported Josephus Daniels in acquiring the Raleigh newspaper, the News and Observer, which served as a major organ of the violent white supremacy campaign. In December 1898, a month after the Wilmington massacre, Carr championed the massacre as a grand and glorious event. In the aftermath of I can't go on without breaking down this paragraph. Look, I want y'all to understand, from here to equality, it may seem like a lot of information, but the writers of this, Dr. Sandy Darity and and A. Kirsten Mullen, they are extremely efficient with this information. Understand, like, the whole book can be written just on this alone, but he packed all the information in the story into just a few paragraphs. Understand what he's talking about right here. He said, Julian Carr, an influential tobacco, textile, and banking industrialist born into a slave-owning family. He donated 62 acres of land that enabled Trinity College to move to Durham. That basically became Duke University. But yeah, that became, so he the college that was here in Wilmington became Duke University, because they, essentially we had Duke University already there in Wilmington. But I don't want to get into that. But I'll say this: if you look at the influence of the people who had an interest in burning down the black cities, they took that and parlayed that into, like, they pretty much put us into refugee status in those cities, and then they built up their cities. It's like, you got to tear us down to ensure you needed to disenfranchise the Negro. So I'm going to read this last two paragraphs, and then I'm gonna pass it on. In the aftermath of the butchery in Wilmington, the stage was set for the white supremacists to gain full control of North Carolina's political apparatus. Carr fervently urged white male voters to go to the polls on August 2nd, 1900, to adopt two amendments, the Grandfather Clause and the poll tax, that effectively would disenfranchise black voters. Now let's read this. It is not my desire to try to stampede your fears by crying nigger. For my part, I would gladly rejoice to strike the word nigger from the vocabulary of North Carolina politics. But the nigger, in the providence of God, is here, and we believe here to stay. And I am not ashamed to say in his presence that I have been a friend of the Negro in the Negro's place. From my very makeup, I am for the underdog in the fight, so that whenever and wherever the Negro has behaved himself and kept himself in his place, my disposition has been to lend him a helping hand. And yet, after I have said all this, I stand here and declare that as a citizen worthy to enjoy the rights of the franchise, the Negro is a failure. So, that's and I want to show you some images. I'm just going to show you some images of that Wilmington massacre. This is that newspaper, the Daily Record, that they burnt down. Look at these devils. Look at these devils. They burnt down the black-owned newspaper, the freedmen-owned newspaper. This is another angle. It had a whole printing press of the thing they burnt down. This is just a little a memorial of that situation that's in Wilmington. And of course, they got the little sign here. If you go there, you can read it. I'm not gonna read it because I already told you the story. And of course, now we see that this was January the 6th. Trump gave an incendiary speech or whatever, and then we see what happened. this is what happened. Now, I wish they had the angle showing the Confederate flag up there, but this is, if you basically, what we saw January 6th was an extension of a series of white mob violence, but especially highlighted by Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. So I want to just pass this over to my brother Naheem. Let me stop my share.
Hey, brother, before you do that, I just want to say one thing real quick, man. And while you was reading that, it just popped into my mind, man, that the descendants of freedmen in this country, the people that we call black people and African Americans, man, we we are the chief protectors of democracy in this country, man.
Yes, sir.
They should be glad to give us reparations. Not only should they give us reparations for the evil, but they should give us reparations, and they should give us breaks and tax breaks and every goddamn thing else, because we are the protectors of democracy. Dr. King, basically what Dr. King did was he made them honor that which they say they were going to honor. And one of the last things that you pointed out, and I keep making reference to this as well, is the January 6th insurrection of this year. It's the same stuff. They basically challenged what? All of the votes in the contested states in jurisdictions where they were majority black voters. And when the stuff didn't go their way, what did they do? They stormed the nation's capital. They That's stormed the republic. You follow what I'm saying to you? But us, our people, have been the supreme grand saviors of this thing that we call democracy, because those people are glad to follow a dictator, just as long as they in the top caste in the dictatorship, man. We the saviors of democracy. We the saviors of the United States, man. And that's why I fly my flag, man. I'm a freedman, man. Freedman first.
Yes, sir.
Brother Ali.
Yes, peace, brothers. Excellent presentation so far. Can you guys hear me okay?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. So, look, I don't know how much time. I know we had an hour and 12 minutes already. I don't know how much time that I have, but I found something really interesting. I was going in about the history of violence in New York, and there's a whole chronology and timeline leading up from the 1700s up into the up until 1960, I think 1964, of racial violence against black people in New York City alone. And this is something that we can do with multiple cities around the country. We probably will be able to pull up tons of history of racial violence against black people in multiple cities around the country. But being that I'm from New York, I'm interested in trying to highlight that particular history. And so I found an article written by, it's actually an excerpt from a book called In the Shadow of Slavery, African Americans in New York City from 1626 to 1863 by Leslie M. Harris. And this particular excerpt is dealing with the New York City draft riots of 1863. And the excerpt points out the violence against black people, but in particular, it points out the violence that was perpetrated against black children, innocent black children, not only just black children, but these were black children who were either sickly or orphaned, living in an orphanage on 42nd Street. I believe it was on 42nd Street at the time. So I'm going to read. I don't want to go too much over 10 minutes. Is that cool? Like, what's the time?
We got it. You good?
All right. So let me just read from it. As a matter of fact, let me share it just so that people can see what I'm reading from. And don't think I'm just reading any old thing. So, all right, so look, let me know if you can see that. Let me know. Oh, you got it up? All right, cool.
Oh yeah, it's up.
So let me go ahead and read from that. Right. Anyway, it starts off in September of 1862. President Abraham Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation, which would take effect January 1st, 1863, and free slaves in those states or regions still in rebellion against the Union. If any southern state returned to the Union between September and January, whites in that state theoretically would not lose ownership of their slaves. Despite its limits, free blacks, slaves, and abolitionists across the country held it as one of the most important actions on behalf of freedom in the nation's history. The Emancipation Proclamation brought formal recognition that the war was being fought, at least in part, on behalf of black freedom and equality. The enactment of the Emancipation Proclamation in January of 1863 capped 2 years of increasing support for emancipation in New York City, although Republicans attempted to keep abolitionists from taking a leading role in New York's anti-slavery politics during the early years of the war. By 1862, abolitionist speakers drew huge audiences, black and white, in the city. Increasing support for the abolitionists and for emancipation led to anxiety among New York's white pro-slavery supporters of the Democratic Party, particularly the Irish. From the time of Lincoln's election in 1860, the Democratic Party had warned New York's Irish and German residents to prepare for the emancipation of slaves and the resultant labor competition when Southern blacks would supposedly flee north. To these New Yorkers, the Emancipation Proclamation was confirmation of their worst fears. In March of 1863, fuel was added to the fire in the form of a stricter federal draft law. All male citizens between 20 and 35 and all unmarried men between 35 and 45 years of age were subject to military duty. The federal government entered all eligible men into a lottery. Those who could afford to hire a substitute or pay the government $300 might avoid enlistment. Interesting. Blacks who were not considered citizens were exempt from the draft. So now they having obviously resentment that they are being forced into a war over black people who can't fight for themselves. In the month preceding the July 1863 lottery, in a pattern similar to the 1834 anti-abolition riots, anti-war newspaper editors published inflammatory attacks on the draft law aimed at inciting the white working class. They criticized the federal government's intrusion into local affairs on behalf of the quote-unquote nigger war. Democratic Party leaders raised the specter of a New York deluge with Southern blacks in the aftermath of the Emancipation Proclamation. White workers compared their value unfavorably to that of Southern slaves, stating that, quote, we are sold for $300, the price of exemption from war service, whilst they pay $1,000 for Negroes. In the midst of wartime economic distress, they believed that their political leverage and economic status was rapidly declining as blacks appeared to be gaining power. On Saturday, July 11th, 1863, the first lottery of the conscription law was held. For 24 hours, the city remained quiet. On Monday, July 13th, 1863, between 6 and 7 a.m., the 5 days of mayhem and bloodshed that would be known as the Civil War draft riots began. The rioters' targets initially included only military and governmental buildings, symbols of the unfairness of the draft. Mobs attacked only those individuals who interfered with their actions. But by afternoon of the first day, some of the rioters had turned to attacks on black people and on things symbolic of black political, economic, and social power. Rioters attacked a black fruit vendor and a 9-year-old boy at the corner of Broadway and Chambers Street before moving to the Colored Orphan Asylum on 5th Avenue between 43rd and 44th Streets. By the spring of 1863, the managers had built a home large enough to house over 200 children. Financially stable and well-stocked with food, clothing, and other provisions, the 4-story orphanage at its location on 5th Avenue and 42nd Street was an imposing symbol of white charity toward blacks and black upward mobility. At 4 p.m. on January 13th, the children, numbering 233, were quietly seated in their schoolrooms, playing in the nursery or reclining on the sickbed in the hospital, when an infuriated mob consisting of several thousand men, women, and children, armed with clubs, brickbats, etc., advanced upon the institution. The crowd took as much of the bedding, clothing, food, and other transportable articles as they could and set fire to the building. John Decker, chief engineer of the fire department, was on hand, but firefighters were unable to save the building. The destruction took 20 minutes. In the meantime, the superintendent and matron of the asylum assembled the children and led them out to 44th Street. Miraculously, the mob refrained from assaulting the children. But when an Irish observer on the scene called out, "If there is a man among you with a heart within him, come and help these poor children," the mob laid hold of him and appeared ready to tear him to pieces. The children made their way to 35th Street Police Station, where they remained for 3 days and nights before moving to the Arms on Blackwell's Island, ironically the very place from which the orphanage's founders had hoped to keep black children when they built the asylum almost 30 years earlier. The Irish man who castigated the mob for not helping the black children was not only the white person punished by the rioters for seeming overly sympathetic to blacks. Throughout the week, mobs sometimes killed blacks and their supporters and destroyed their property. Rioters burned the home of Abby Hopper Gibbons, prison reformer and daughter of abolitionist Isaac Hopper. They also attacked white amalgamationists such as Ann Derrickson and Ann Martin, 2 women who were married to black men, and Mary Burke, a white prostitute who catered to black men. Near the docks, tensions that had been brewing since the mid-1850s between white longshoremen and black workers boiled over. As recently as March of 1863, white employers had hired blacks as longshoremen, with whom Irish men refused to work. An Irish mob then attacked 200 blacks and were working on blacks who were working on the docks, while other rioters went into the streets in search of all Negro porters, cartmen, and laborers they could find. They were routed by the police. But in July of 1863, white longshoremen took advantage of the chaos of the draft riots to attempt to remove all evidence of a black and interracial social life from the area near the docks. White dock workers attacked and destroyed brothels, dance halls, boarding houses, and tenements that catered to blacks. Mobs stripped the clothing off of white owners of these businesses. Black men and black women were attacked, but the rioters singled out the men for special violence. On the waterfront, they hanged William Jones and then burned his body. White dock workers also beat and nearly drowned Charles Jackson, and they beat Jeremiah Robinson to death and threw his body in the river. Rioters also made a sport of mutilating the black men's bodies, sometimes sexually. A group of white men and boys mortally attacked black sailor William Williams, jumping on his chest, plunging a knife into him, smashing his body with stones, while a crowd of men, women, and children watched. None intervened, and when the mob was done with Williams, they cheered, pledging vengeance on every nigger in New York. A white laborer, George Glass, rousted black coachman Abraham Franklin from his apartment and dragged him through the streets. A crowd gathered and hanged Franklin from a lamppost as they cheered for Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president. This is in New York. After the mob pulled Franklin's body from the lamppost, a 16-year-old Irish man, Patrick Butler, dragged the body through the streets by its genitals. Black men who tried to defend themselves fared no better. The crowds were pitiless. After James Costello shot at and fled from a white attacker, 6 white men beat, stomped, kicked, and stoned him before hanging him from a lamppost. With these actions, white workers enacted their desires to eradicate the working class black male presence from the city. The Longshoremen's Association, a white labor union, patrolled the piers during the riots, insisting that the colored people must and shall be driven to other parts of industry. But other parts of industry, such as cartmen and hack drivers, not to mention skilled artisans, also sought to exclude black workers. The riots gave all these workers license to physically remove blacks, not only from work sites, but also from neighborhoods and leisure spaces. The rioters' actions also indicate the degree to which the sensational journalists and reformers of the 1840s and 50s had achieved their goals of convincing whites, and particularly the Irish, that interracial socializing and marriage were evil and degrading practices. The riots unequivocally divided white workers from blacks. The act of rioting may itself have released guilt and shame over former interracial pleasures. Finally, and most simply, white workers asserted their superiority over blacks through the riots. The Civil War and the rise of the Republican Party and Lincoln to power indicated to New York's largely Democrat white workers a reversal of power in the nation. Black labor competition indicated a reversal of fortunes in New York City itself. White workers sought to remedy their upside-down world through mob violence. Ironically, the most well-known center of black and interracial social life, the Five Points, was relatively quiet during the riots. Mobs neither attacked the brothels nor killed black people within its borders. There were also instances of interracial cooperation when a mob threatened black drugstore owner Philip White in his store at the corner of Gold and Frankfurt Street. The Irish neighbors drove the mob away, for he had often extended them credit. And when rioters invaded Hart's Alley and became trapped at its dead end, the black and white residents of the alley together leaned out of their windows and poured hot starch on them, driving them from the neighborhood. But such incidents were few compared to the widespread hatred of blacks expressed during and after the riots. In all, rioters lynched 11 black men over the 5 days of mayhem. The riots forced hundreds of blacks out of the city. As Ivor Bernstein states, for months after the riots, the public life of the city became more noticeably white domain. During the riots, landlords drove blacks from their residences, fearing the destruction of their property. After the riots, when the Colored Orphan Asylum attempted to rebuild on the site of its old building, neighboring property owners asked them to leave. The orphanage relocated to 51st Street for 4 years before moving into a new residence at 143rd Street between Amsterdam and Broadway, in the midst of what would become New York's predominantly black neighborhood in the 20th century Harlem. But in 1867, the area was barely settled and far removed from the center of New York City. Black families also fled the city altogether. Albro Lyons, keeper of the Colored Sailors' Home, was able to protect the boarding house on the first day of the riots, but soon fled to the neighborhood police station to seek an escort from the city for his wife and family. An officer accompanied the Lyons family to the Sailors' Home, where they gathered up what belongings they could carry before boarding the Roosevelt Street ferry, which took them to Williamsburg and Brooklyn. From the moment they put foot on the boat, that was the last time they ever resided in New York City, leaving it forever. Other blacks fled to New Jersey and beyond. By 1865, the black population had plummeted to just under 10,000, its lowest since 1820. There's more. I could stop there. But in any case, this is just an excerpt from a book called In the Shadow of Slavery, African Americans in New York City, 1626 to 1863. And there are a number of incidents like this that took place in New York from that time period. And then even after, especially if you want to start talking about certain police violence. And you know what's interesting about police violence? One of those coons, this I call them Sambo coons, that was on the HR 40 hearing today. It might have been Larry Elder, was talking about black on black crime, and then he started talking about how white people are killed more white people are killed by police than black people, right? Which is a game that they like to play because in certain instances they talk about disproportionate. And then in certain instances, they go to the raw numbers and they start talking about, well, more white people are killed by police than black people, right? Ignoring the whole disproportionate perspective in that instance because he wants to create a fallacious argument. So he was talking today about white people getting killed by police, as if being killed by police is the only type of violence that black people experience. What they want to do is ignore, when they make that argument about more white people get killed by police than black people, they want to ignore the fact that police brutality against black people is an actual thing. And that happens a whole lot, and it's being ignored in this whole narrative about who gets killed by police more. So when we talk about violence from police and the violence against black people, it's not always something that leads to death. Like with these children in this particular this children's asylum that was on 42nd Street, that was violence against them, right? Even though it didn't result in the murder of those children, they would have, if they didn't take those children to safety, they would have killed them. But the bottom line is, everything doesn't result in death. And so when we're talking about violence, we can't always assume that we're talking about black people being murdered or castrated or whatever the case is, but just the violence perpetrated against people's persons, against their property, against their right to life, the right to happiness, all of those things that are enshrined as the God-given rights that governments are supposed to protect in the Declaration of Independence. So I'll stop there, brothers.
Cursed be Canaan, man. A slave of slaves shall he be. That's their charter, man.
Indeed. I mean, that history was crazy from New York. And everybody's testimony, basically, from the record was just absolutely crazy. And I just want to close it out with this little excerpt from out of Dr. Darity's book, From Here to Equality, because it also speaks to the coons. And I just can't call them anything but coons that were at the HR 40 hearing today.
I got a bunch of names I could call.
Larry Elder, Herschel Walker, and Burgess Owens. So let me read this real quick. It says, throughout the 20th century, America also was characterized by a long and extensive lynching trail, a pathway of extra-legal executions of blacks. Every time we hear the word extra-legal, we think of Ahmaud Arbery, like just one of the people that we think of in today's times, I should say, in the United States of America. One obvious consequence was the frequent elimination of a family's breadwinner. Read that line again. One obvious consequence was the frequent elimination of a family's breadwinner. The most recent estimates placed the number of blacks murdered in this fashion by white gangs and mobs between 1877 and 1950 at close to 4,000 in Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. Moreover, lynchings often were associated directly with the expropriation of black-owned land, and the threat of lynching created a climate of intimidation to promote black subordination. So, when we hear those coons that were on today trying to make it seem as if we're just lazy, that if our Larry Elder kept saying and attributing our problems to the fact that there were no black men in the crib, there were no fathers, but generations of our fathers were snatched from us. Those that would have planted the seeds that would have grew the tree called generational wealth were taken from us. The soil that seed for that tree that would have been planted in was expropriated. Point blank period. They took that land from us. They took it from us. So, matter of fact, Michelle Alexander, in her book, The New Jim Crow, she expertly breaks this down of how the carceral state, this need to incarcerate our people to keep us in some form of bondage, keep us in some form of slavery by targeting our men, is the main reason that men are not in the house. This not only removes the man, it removes the influence of manhood so that the young boy doesn't see that directly, but he may see that from those who may not have had a father in the home that stood on the corners and did what it is that they do. And this is how your gangs form. So there are components, societal components to a lot of what these men were saying. And I'm thinking about breaking down all of that stuff that they were saying and putting it in just a little separate video, just addressing each one of their points according to the historical records.
Hey, brother, you said something interesting about killing the breadwinners, right? And we will always tie in this narrative and this history into the necessity of reparations and why reparations is due and why reparations has to be centered around the sons and daughters of the freedmen, right? We have to have a freedmen first political philosophy. We have to have a freedmen first political ideology. You understand? Because if we don't, we the first Americans. We the first and we the true Americans. You understand? We was the only group of people created in America. But when they killing the breadwinners and the exodus, what they call the northern migration, it wasn't just a pursuit for jobs, right? And people always talk about the migration, but they don't talk about what they left behind and what they were fleeing from. You understand? If you could pull my screen up, I want to talk about what happened and why reparations is so important, right? Our people were leaving homes because of violence, leaving land because of violence, leaving their family members because of violence and domestic terrorism. They were fleeing in terror. You understand? So let's look at this, right? These are this is on their website, Lynching in America, racial terror lynchings. Racial terror lynchings were not limited to the South, but the Southern states had the most in the nation, over 4,000 between 1877 and 1855. Let's look at some of these numbers, right? Let's look at Texas. 338 reported lynchings out of Texas. And this is just what's reported now. Now we know all this stuff ain't getting reported. Let's look at Louisiana, 549 reported lynchings. Arkansas, 492. Good old Mississippi, where my father's from, 654 reported lynchings. Alabama, 360. Georgia, 594. Florida, 317. South Carolina, 189. And just look at all of this, right? This, and when you look at it, right, now let's go to this right here. From 1910, this is a timeline of the Great Migration. From 1910 to 1970, spreading out. And so from like almost 1% of us living up north to about 12% in about 60 years, right? 12% of us fled. This was an exodus. But I want you to understand the damage or what that happened. There's a book out talking about a concept of Black folks coming back down south, right? What's the name of that book?
It's the Devil You Know is the name of the book.
You're on mute, Abba.
My bad. The Devil You Know by Charles Blow. This kind of struck me. Let me say real quick. I think we should do a book club on this. I think that we should get everybody to read this, and then we should just come back and do a book club on it. This is powerful. The concept and the ideology, certain things I'm like, but that's going to be with any work. But the concept is, real quick, is that Charles M. Blow believes that we should reverse migrate and re-inhabit the southern states and control, I forget how many seats. As you can see, I'm taking copious notes. So, I mean, it's a powerful book and it's a powerful concept. Go ahead, Brother Logic.
Yeah, and the concept, I haven't read the book, but but I understand where he's at with that, right? Because that was the fear. You've seen us read it on this channel plenty of times, from the Bloody Shirt and other various works, on what the fear was in the South was the fear of a political numerical majority of our people in the South. And so that's what they did. All of this terror and all of this violence was to get rid of the political majority that could end up turning in, and what they was fearful of was a black ruling elite class in America. So they spread us out. They spread us out because we had the numbers, and they saw. We on the program a day or two ago, Naheem read the piece where the brother was talking about 1 year from slavery, we made what the progress we made was equivalent to a century. 1 year from slavery, we made equivalent of 100 years of progress. This terrified white folks, and we suffered from white fear of black progress. The freedmen progression was so fast. We are very progressive people. You can't find another people that has been through the hell we've been through and has progressed like we done progressed. We such good at struggling and overcoming. You got those silly ass niggas that was at the HR 40 talking about we don't need reparations. In spite of all this data, in spite of all this history, because we're such an overcoming people. You understand? So, but that just because you can overcome a situation doesn't mean you don't deserve justice for going through that thing. You understand? So now you got people like Burgess Owens, Herschel Walker, Larry Elder, who are the minority from among us, wanting to debate the majority about reparations. And what you see what I'm saying? So that's what happens when you don't have a collective experience, right? That's another part of what that forced migration did, because we were all living that same experience. We were the 99.999% of us was living that same life. But when we was forced to flee out, we separated. Our power was diminished. Do you understand? And then our experiences got different. If you went all the way to California, your experience was different out there. Depending on where you landed at, your experience is different. So now we don't even see each other as the same people no more. You looking at me like I'm like my mother and your mother going all the way back down, probably was on the same plantation together. You understand? So you don't even see me as the same tribe no more. I talked about it on the last program that's how our tribe got lost. You understand? Through the Great Migration, our tribe got lost. But through this freedmen education that we're giving you, we have found that tribe. And now we are the lost found tribe of freedmen. You understand? Understanding this history, the brother was asking us, well, what are we going to do about it? First thing we're going to do, and first thing any responsible individual is going to do, is going to give you the proper education. You got to be educated right. If you can't tell me about 5 freedmen right off the bat, you don't got the right education. If you can't talk about Robert Smalls, Prince Rivers, Hiram Revels, if you can't go deeper than the stuff that they done surface stuff they done told you about Harriet Tubman, and you can't really go deep into Frederick Douglass and things like that, if you can't go deep into your own history, you need education. You understand? So education has to be at the core of everything. And if you know more about Egypt and Timbuktu and Songhai, Ghana and Mali than you know about South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and all these places that
Virginia
got the wrong education. You understand? Virginia, can't forget Virginia. You understand? If you know more about that stuff than you do your own history, we have a problem. You understand what they say? Houston, we have a problem. So we have to start with the education first. And so that you will have a freedman first philosophy, because a lot of you want to talk about something else first and then say, oh yeah, my people, we was freedom riders and we sat on the bus. That's the last thing you want to talk about. You ain't proud enough about your history yet. You still want to be quiet about it. But we are the greatest overcomers, and we talk about the violence, right? And I'm gonna say this, and I'm a yield. We talk about the violence and focus on the atrocities to highlight the courageousness of our people. These were the most fearless, the most courageous people in the history of humankind. You see the pictures of the people being burned, the bones being broken, and the body parts being sold, and our people still had the civil rights movement. Our people still was insurrections in the slave plantations. You understand? In spite of all of that hell, we still rebelled. You understand? We still had the courage to rebel in spite of all of that hell. So we are trying to rekindle that flame, that warrior spirit in the freedmen. There's a warrior spirit in the freedmen. You understand? That makes you want to be free. That makes you want to make America make good when they talk about that liberty, justice for all. You understand? We made them own that. And then, we suffered the consequence. But now the sons and daughters of freedmen are here today to continue that fight. And you have to fight. And it is a battle. And these are my battle brothers right here. And we are the freedmen helping you find your way back to yourself, family, and your true history.
That's right. Get back to the ways and thinking of your freedmen forefathers. Let me say real quick, and I want one of the bros to come in. Charles Blow spoke about something interesting in the book when he said that in the South, our people were more grounded and rooted in, and I'm paraphrasing, lineage, basically. Our grandfathers and grandma, like we could trace that line back. In the North, that stuff went out the window. It was too fast paced. Everything was fast moving. There was an infusion of people coming in from other countries. It was truly a melting pot. So that emphasis placed on family and that heritage, you hear that term, Southern heritage. Heritage is not a term that you necessarily hear in the big cities, right? I know I've never really heard that New York heritage or that Northern heritage. That's something that you mainly hear in the South. So, I thought that was interesting. And I kind of wanted to camelback off of what you were just saying in that regard and speaking of that book. And let me just respond to Brother Bahi. He said, could we do Dr. Darity's book first on the book club? I don't mind that. I think we covered so much of Dr. Darity's book here on BTP, particularly one stream we did. I thought that was like a book club. Everybody was saying it in the chat, but I'll definitely consult with the brothers and see what they think about that as well. Brother Grimm.
Peace, brother. Yeah, man, this has been a hard history, man, to basically go over, but we basically had to show it. And I'm just like repeating myself, but it's important that we get this history out because we have to tie those evils of slavery and then subsequently the Reconstruction era and then the post Reconstruction era, which we go be doing tomorrow, to show this linear connection from those evils of the past to what's going on with us in the present. Because see, they want to erase all of that, like what Larry Elder was doing and his Republican compatriots was doing. They basically want to erase all of that history, and then they want to replace the failure, right, that's going on in Black community with the idea that Black people are lazy. Black people are not working hard enough. Black people are not doing this. Black people are not doing that. Black people want to blame their problems on this. When it's a systematic componentry all the way from then to now, which when you look at party politics from between the Democratic and the Republican Party, which the people who were originally in the Democratic Party, right, for lack of a word on my part, they gentrified the Republican Party and turned the Republican Party to what the Democratic Party used to be at. But when you look at party politics, it played a role in passing laws, right? When they positioned themselves and also to touch on what Brother Logic was saying and how they basically dispersed us all around the United States and basically watered down and blotted out our political power by spreading us thin, right? So basically, when you look at party politics and passing legislation, these legislations are not isolated from the ideals of the original Confederacy. That's why today's Republican Party are not Republicans, they are Confederates. All of this stuff is connected. When I say party, the politics of party and passing legislation, we have to look at redistricting. We have to look at redlining. We have to look at the banking laws when they were basically passing laws to disenfranchise black people who were going to lenders to get loans. All of this stuff was legislated. And you know, I'm not gonna get into this because we're gonna talk about this tomorrow, even with the drug war. Now, with the drug war or the war on drugs, basically it's perceived as a medical problem, a mental problem. Like, oh my God, I feel so sorry for Karen. She took some pills and now she's addicted. You know, when back in the day, like what Logic was talking about when we was doing it, they had, this is your brain on drugs. You are bad. They basically turned the addiction epidemic in our country, in our community, that was allowed to happen by the federal government. So basically the same disinterest that the federal government, particularly, I always talk about Rutherford B. Hayes in 1877 with the compromise, right? The same disinterest that the federal government showed in black suffering during this time is the same disinterest that they showed in the crack era. So what you have is a Joe Biden who comes along and say, yeah, we're going to lock them up. We don't care what they did. All of this stuff and the disinterest of the government, the blame of the government, the damage of the government, all this stuff is tied together linearly, right? From what point A to point B in a straight line. And that's why we do reparations.
Indeed, Brother Ali.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I had my mic on mute. My bad. So yeah. Anyway, man, that's what I had. I presented what I was going to present for tonight. Tomorrow, since we're going after Reconstruction, tomorrow I'll present some more things coming after Reconstruction. I'm glad we're going to move going forward into the crack thing. And remember, we talked on the phone about how in New York, you had all of these, you know, people who seen movies like Fort Apache, the Bronx and stuff like that, right? You kind of get an image of what New York looked like late 60s, early 70s, into the mid 70s. You kind of get an idea what New York looked like moving into the crack era, and all of those burnt out, abandoned buildings throughout New York City in the urban centers where the blacks and Latinos were. That stuff was done deliberately. And we can talk about that as another form of violence against, racial violence against black people in particular, in New York City. So we'll talk about that later.
Indeed, brother Josh.
Yeah, man, another powerful bill, powerful in terms of information. But, you know, this stuff gets to me, man. That stuff is like, you know, because, you know, I just think back to family members, you know, who had to deal with stuff like that. Ali, I mean, we talked about when Logic was talking about, when he was talking about that, the migration. Did you want to tell a story? I mean, you know, some that not even tell a story to be long with it, but just kind of, you know, mention how that applies to your story and your family story. I didn't know if you wanted to share that.
Well, with my mother's side of the family, the Great Migration was something that, like many people in the South, they did that because they were running from racial terror in Florida. So the story is that my aunt, whose name was Maggie, witnessed some white men in Florida murder a black man. They saw that she saw them, and because of that, they started to come after her. So one day, my people used to work in the fields in Florida. They were bean pickers, right? And my mother said they used to stay in the quarters. They call it the quarters, but they used to be the slave quarters that were still there on those farms or plantations. And so that's where they actually lived, in what they call the quarters. And so my family, they were in the field picking beans one day, and these white men came in the pickup truck and were trying to run my Aunt Maggie over out there in the field while they was working. So my grandfather snatched her up, ran with her off into the woods, hiding from these men. Stayed in the woods all night because the men were looking for them. He was hiding from them. So finally, they gave up looking for him. He came home. They packed up everything they could in their Model T or whatever kind of car it was. She said it was one of them cars where it had the crank on the front of the car where you have to turn the crank to start the car up. So that was the kind of automobile they had. They packed everything that they could. Obviously, they couldn't take everything that they could fit in there with all of the kids, jumped in that car and left the state of Florida and ultimately ended up in New York. So that's what happened. They were running from what they called white Klansmen, who my aunt saw murder a black man in cold blood.
Yeah, man, that's just crazy. But that's a typical story. You try to think about how people's families got to New York, or Chicago, or LA, or I know my grandfather. He didn't tell me the whole reason why he went to New York, but I know he he ended up joining the military. But before that, he left out of Arkansas and went to New York. So. It's so much to get to during this period of time. It's like we didn't get into. I had some stuff I wanted to read on Parchment Prison, which is highlighting the horrors of the convict leasing system. You can go check out a book called Worse Than Slavery. Just the title of that book kind of lets you know how horrible the convict leasing system was. And it's interesting that Parchment Prison is still open today. And just not too long ago, was it last year, the year before that, it was some serious news that came out how prisoners were just dying. Now imagine how COVID-19 would ravage a place like that. We didn't even get into the eugenics program. We didn't get into the Jack Johnson riots. Now imagine Deontay Wilder. What if he beat Tyson Fury and then they just started lynching black folks and murdering kids and stuff in the street, or in cities all around the country? Imagine if that would happen to them. That's what happened. Jack Johnson beat with the dude Jeffries, and white folks was, black folks celebrating, white folks was killing black folks in the street. Things like that. We didn't even get it. We can get into all kind of stuff, man. That was just the worst atrocities and the worst violence, and that just builds the case, the case of just based on the violence, man, for reparations. And that's the stuff that people feel, and unfortunately, that's the legacy, that's the cost that we still have to deal with. We still have to deal with how that was transferred to us in terms of how our great grandparents and great grandparents dealt with their kids and the cost that was put on their families, the wealth that was not allowed to be accumulated, the stability and the sense of family that was disrupted, the community that was disrupted, all of these things. And this is just physical harm. We're not even talking about economic harm and all of that kind of stuff. So I just got to say, man, this has been an episode of Be the Power that, you know, usually I'm down to go into this stuff, but this has been a hard episode for me. You know, I don't know about y'all. This is a hard episode for me because this stuff is just, man. This, when you want to think about what the freedmen had to endure. Now, I want to say this too. If you just think about the people who, the mentality of the plantation owners, the overseers, and all the people that did horrible things to us during the period of slavery. We get to fight in a civil war where a lot of times we might have killed their brother, killed their daddy, you know, and now we getting in power. We able to be state senators and govern and U.S. congressmen. You know what I'm saying? And these people, imagine they think they have that in the back of their head. They just went through the bloodiest war in the history of the land, and they seen the people that might have been a part of the army that killed their brother or that killed their whoever, cousin, father, husband. Now that kind of sets the stage for a lot of these where they want to extract their type of vengeance upon that. Now let us not, you know, they have no sense of having justice, of us getting any type of justice. They just out for white supremacy by any means necessary. And if you think about how, I mean, what that entailed, that's why you see the crazy mob violence around the country. I just, man, when you think about the spirit that's in the people today, they channeling that spirit. And we have to do something about that, America. We have to do something about that. We got to put that to an end, and it needs to come in the form of reparations and a program that fully gets the Confederate spirit out of America through legislation, you know, and through systemically. Whether it gets into somebody's soul, I'm not down. We can't control that, but what we can control is making sure that they can't do what they did to us in the past anymore. Peace.
Indeed. So we are past the 2-hour mark, family. We will be back tomorrow night with part 3 of our series, A History of Violence. And that violence is against our people from the times of slavery till we become a new tribe, the freedmen, and its everlasting effects on our people. There was an article that was published today. It was actually cited by, I think it was Sheila Jackson Lee. I was kind of shocked, but it said that if reparations, I forget who put the article out, if reparations had been paid, COVID would not have hit blacks as hard, or something to that effect. If blacks would have received reparations, COVID would not have hit us that bad. You know, we would have had the same positionality, one, as wealthy people. Two, we would have, you know, just been in a position to whereas we didn't have to force ourselves to go to some job that was being ran by some white billionaires that didn't care if you get sick or die, like they was doing at the Tyson chicken plant. They was lying about what the CDC was saying, lying about their odds or chances of catching COVID, and then taking over and under bets. The executives were. So, you know, it's just crazy. But make sure y'all check out my brother Grimm's channel, Urban Mystic Science. Post the link to your channel in the chat. Make sure y'all check out my brother Logic's channel, Politics with Logic Supreme. Dynamic content from the mystical and spiritual, from the historical, particularly freedmen historical aspects of our people, coming from our brother Grimm and our brother Logic going in. Y'all already know he gives breakdowns from policy all the way up to what is called MMT today, modern monetary theory. So make sure y'all check out our brothers. Let's help them grow their channels as well. We need more people hearing the voices of our brethren so that more people can become just educated in what it is that we're teaching here. This is not some self-aggrandizement that we're doing. This is for us. This is for us as a people. This is family right here. And everybody that we're connected with, if you were on the stream earlier, you witnessed family gather.
Yeah.
We had disagreements and it wasn't nobody cursing each other out or none of that stuff. Even in the disagreements, there was jokes and all of those types of things, because that's just what family do. That's just what family do.
Yo, it's for us and it's for them. You understand? Right. This is my oldest surviving ancestor. Let's do it for them.
That's right.
All that violence we talked about, it happened to them. You understand? My oldest ancestor, 1834, Purdue Plantation in Georgia. She had to live through that. She was a freed woman. She had to live through all that violence we was talking about. It's for us, but we're doing it for them. That's what being a freedman in this day and time is about.
That's right.
Doing for them. You know what I mean?
That's right. So we're about to get off air. Riri said she can't share your videos. I think your channel may be private. I don't know. I was able to share your video, so I don't know if that's the case.
Nah. You can share them. People been sharing them all day.
I don't know.
You got to check your end, Ree, because you can share them. It's definitely shareable.
All right, definitely. So we're gonna get up off of here. We will be back tomorrow night with part 3, the post-Reconstruction atrocities. We're gonna get into the chemical warfare that was waged against our people in the form of crack cocaine. We are going to get into some of the atrocities that, I mean, where do we start, right? Where do we start with what these people have done to us? I mean, we could go to the 50s, to the 60s, we could get into the real life story that is the Life movie. But
we could start, if you want, we could start with the Red Summer of 1919 and move forward.
We could start there. The Red Summer of 1919. It's called the Red Summer for a reason.
We can even go to 1911, the race riots in Springfield, Illinois, that got the NAACP started in the first place.
Yeah,
and out of a little apartment in New York after that happened. It was so messed up. These people in New York met and started the NAACP off of that kind of violence. There's so much.
We're going to go straight from there to George Floyd, to Breonna Taylor. And everybody in between. Rodney King. That was racial. And it just so happened that a camera was rolling. It just so happened that a camera was rolling. And we all can't just get along, because these people ain't never try to get along. And the books like The Bloody Shirt and White Too Long and From Here to Equality, etc., gives us the proofs that we need that they ain't never try to get along, that this has always been a divided nation. And we need to understand that, and understand, like my brother Ali always says, division is divine. So I'll leave y'all with the saying of the platform, and that is, don't just fight the power, become the power, and then you will have the power to make a change. And with that, I say peace.